Well, anyway, when
Are you?
another thing,
Take me
Alice,
with
you've
you.
got letters from
Why don't you
have
meet us?
letters
Dick might meet us.
You might.
from
I
one
might
of the
just
girls
do that.
in Illinois,
You might just
and
do
she was
that.
telling you
We just go
about
out to all them cemeteries
letter
and
that
libraries and everything.
Aunt Annie
Look at
wrote
your records, they say.
We'll
her
dig,
mother.
dig pop
She
up.
was a little girl about her being in a boarding school or being hard out to somebody,
She told me that.
and she had to work very hard, and she had a hard,
They said
stressed
they
life.
wouldn't look it up for me.
Well, did you know that there's in the historical documents in the Oklahoma and Indian Territory,
I can't understand
there's a
that.
letter that Belle Starr's daughter wrote her when she was in the prison
Daddy
over
always
at
told
Fort
us
Smith, Arkansas, and it's the very same words that this girl said.
Indian territory down when he got beat
The
up.
very same words that she used. How can you get around that? How can you explain it?
So
I think she was,
Well,
they were raised.
You've looked up on history on it. I haven't.
We
I haven't done any research.
Hey, do we have any letters from Aunt Annie?
Grandpa,
Grandpa,
Mama used to
Do
have.
you have any
did
letters from
Grandpa
Aunt Annie?
ever say anything about his mother?
Well, somebody wrote to
Well,
Papa.
he told me
Yes, it was my
all
mother
these
or
things that
Aunt
I'm
Pearl
putting
wrote
out
to you.
is all that I know that he told about.
I didn't know any.
He never asked him about his mother?
But she always signed an X. I've seen that.
Well,
Her insurance is
really, I didn't have anything. Really, I didn't have anything to ask him because
She read
it
the
was
newspaper
unbeknownst
all.
fact to me. I didn't know anything about it anyway. And what he volunteered and told me, see, well, I just remembered and put it together. That's the only thing.
Poor Daddy, I wish he'd
Like,
told us more.
Did your dad ever tell you anything about his mother?
He used to
Well, now, but there's one thing I want to ask now. You said your mother went to the 3rd grade.
Grandmother.
Your grandmother. But yet you say your grandmother couldn't write.
Yeah, she could read. And part-time, she said that she waded snow real deep to get to school. And she said that she had to wash dishes from the time she was so little. She had to stand on a box to reach the dishes to wash them. So I think she was put in an orphanage. And then the McCulloughs raised her. And at that time, they took the Indian kids for slave labor. And I think that's what she was taken for.
Well, history teaches that this Belle Starr, when her mother, or when Belle Starr went to the pen, this girl was put in a home, and she had to work. And the home wasn't McCullough that she was put in; it was McLaughlin. Could Pop mixed up on the name of that or something? And this letter that was written by her to her mother in the prison, that she had to work so hard. And you say that Aunt Annie couldn't write.
No.
Well, how did this girl, Pearl's mother, the letter that she saw written to her mother about how hard she worked, how did she write that, or how did she get that?
That Bert, she wrote me and Maggie a letter, and she said, this is what my grandmother always told me. And then she proceeded to tell what her grandmother told her. She didn't have a letter that was written to her grandmother. She just said, to her mother. She said, this is what mother always said. And then she proceeded to tell us in the letter,
And this is from
Well,
Aunt Annie?
I thought she had it in a letter, but she didn't.
from Aunt Annie's daughter, one of her daughters. I wrote to one of her daughters. And her daughter, because I thought, well, the daughter is more close to her mother, and maybe than Pop, than a boy like Papa. He wasn't interested, probably, how boys are. So I thought, well, that Aunt Annie would probably know more and probably told her daughters, more. And so I wrote her, and this is what she wrote to me and Maggie and told us. She said, now this is what grandmother always said. They had a real hard time. She said, our grandfather was killed when they were very young, and she grieved so much over, grandmother grieved so much over grandfather's death that she died shortly thereafter and left 4 little children. He said, my mother being the oldest, Annie, and then your daddy, Ben, and then Maggie. And she said, and then there was a baby, a tiny baby named Katie, and said, my mother says that a family in the neighborhood took the baby to raise, and said later on, when my mother grew up and got married, my mother tried to find that family. She would have liked to have taken the other sister. You know, she tried to find that family to locate the baby's sister, but
Well,
the family had moved away, and she never did know where they went.
What about Maggie?
Well, she said Maggie went to live with her. Said after my mother married, Maggie came to Illinois to live with her.
Now,
Our
Maggie,
Aunt Maggie, and then Maggie married this man named Stone, and they had some children. And Aunt Maggie died at childbirth, and that these children were adopted out, and that her mother, Aunt Annie, wanted to take the babies, Aunt Maggie's children, and raise them, but she had so many children of her own, and times were hard, and the state would not allow her to do this.
now, it was
That's
Stone that
exactly what-
poisoned her.
I remember that letter just.
And she had a daughter named Sarah
Okay.
Johnson.
Okay, now, she didn't say anything in the letter about poisoning the daughter, your aunt.
Yeah. Now,
But-
Maggie was supposed to have a daughter named Sarah Johnson, and Vic has met her.
Yeah.
Vic met her, and she lived in central Illinois. And I remember seeing a picture of Sarah Johnson with her husband and 2 little girls. And the last I heard where she was in Chicago.
Well, now I don't know where we heard this story. But if somebody wrote to Papa back in those days or what, but Mama told. Now you heard the story before we ever met. That Aunt Maggie was poisoned.
Yeah.
Right, you
Oh, yeah.
knew that
Yeah.
before you ever even
Yeah.
Okay, we heard the story before we ever met you.
Oh.
Way back, Mama said that Papa said that her husband poisoned her.
Yeah.
And he said they could never prove it because but
he
they
ran away
knew, Aunt Annie or some of the relatives knew that he did this, but they could never prove it.
Yeah.
Now
He went away and joined the army and got in the army, and then they
Now
couldn't get him out.
Now, do you suppose that Aunt Annie wrote and told Papa that?
I do.
Or was Papa out there at her funeral? What year did Aunt Maggie die? Do you know?
I thought Aunt Annie couldn't write.
She couldn't.
Well, somebody wrote letters for her.
It seems as though my mother was always writing and sending pictures back and forth, because my mother thought a lot of your dad. And she only knew him through pictures and hearing from him.
But she was one of the type that wanted to have
Yes.
a relative.
And Aunt Beryl did some. Aunt Beryl wrote when she was real little for Grandma. But I remember my mother writing to your dad. And I think, was he living in Austin, Texas?
He never lived. I don't know if he lived in Austin. If he did, it's before I was born. Yeah, he might have lived there. Him and Mom might have lived there. Some, I don't know.
I don't know. It seems to me like
He ever lived in Austin?
better something.
Lived in San Antonio.
San
Maybe that's
Antonio.
where it was.
Because I can remember when we lived in San Antonio
Yeah.
a little bit.